everybody, this is Heather and Miss Jennifer from the Hagerstown Public Library, and this year our summer reading theme is Oceans of Possibilities. So we decided to do, like we did a couple of years ago, like our mythology, we are actually going to do a couple classes on ocean lore. So this is going to be the first class of 4, okay, this is one of 4 classes we're doing. The first one is Deities. Next week will be Sunken Cities. Legends of the Deep is the week after, and then we have Landlocked and Underwater, so like Loch Ness, Monster, Nessie. I'm kind of excited about that one. Do you have anything to add?
I have nothing to add.
Nothing to add. Okay. So let's jump into it. This is ocean lore from all over the world. It is specific to oceans of different continents. So I will get started, and Jennifer is going to kick us off.
I am going to kick us off. So we're traveling all over the world. We are going to try to talk about some deities associated with the ocean, the seas, water, that fit the parameters. We're going to start in Africa and the Middle East. The first one is Nomos, who are amphibious ancestor spirits. I just realized I had a picture of that and then I forgot to bring it over here.
It's okay.
But either way, they were the spirits of ancestors that resided in the water that the people there worshipped to protect them from the water.
Mm-hmm. Pretty simple.
Pretty simple.
All right, so the next two I'll have is Kambazi, and this one's from the Congo. So this is the African, Middle Eastern continents. So this is from the Congo. Kambazi, she is the goddess of sea storms. That's what she does. That's her niche, I guess. And then, hold on. Kuitik, Kuikiti is how I'm going to botch that name. It is a serpent god of the Congo River. And the Congo River is very important to that area just because it is what their life is about. It's the Congo, and exploration was a big thing. Okay. So
this is where we make our disclaimer that we're going to butcher a lot of pronunciations here, so just bear with us.
Yes.
Or make fun of us. That's okay.
Either way, or you can use your own recommendations on how we would say it. It's fine.
The next one to mention are the Simbi Diamaza, which were nymphs or goddesses of water, plural, that lived in the lakes and rivers in the Congo.
Mm-hmm. So something I will mention, and she will as well down the road through this lesson or video, is that a lot of these tribes and different places in the world, they share very similar kind of deities or gods, however you want to put it. Like nymphs is something that I've seen and Jennifer has read consistently through every deity that is all the continents we're talking about. So there'll be a lot of mention of nymphs. The most you're going to recognize is Greeks and Roman are very nymph heavy on their mythology and or lore. So there's going to be a lot of repetition, but some of them will have different meanings to different tribes or different groups of people. So just bear with us. And then you have the next one as well.
The next one, we're going to travel now to Egypt. And Egyptian deities. And Egyptian deities are pretty well known in culture even today. But the first one isn't maybe as well known. Her name is Berthi. She is often depicted with a picture of her balancing a water container on her head. She holds a long spear-like scepter in her hand.
You will see this a lot in like hieroglyphics.
So she was the goddess of water for the Egyptian people.
It's kind of a big thing because the Nile is what, they worship the Nile and those kinds of gods. Because if you didn't have rain, you didn't have crops, you didn't have anything. So the next one we're going to go on is Sobek. Okay, Sobek is the god of the Nile River. Like I said, it's very, very important to them. depicted as a crocodile or a man with the head of a crocodile. This is like such a cool picture of him we found. He's pretty cool. He's very prevalent because of the Egypt being very dependent on the Nile River.
And lots of crocodiles.
Lots of crocodiles. Feeding people to crocodiles kind of deal. Sacrifice, basically. The next one we have is Tefnut. When Rachel Hill and I did this, we touched a lot on Egyptian mythology. We had a whole series of it. Yes. She is the goddess of water, moisture, and fertility. She was very important to the women of Egypt, especially the queens and just very fertile women. And they would pray to her for children, safe water, and be able to have a good crop for that year. So, the next, we are going into Mesopotamia, or Mesopotamian. The first one we have is Abzu, god of fresh water, father of all other gods. So he is kind of the equivalent of Re or Zeus for the other cultures. He's all of those. The next one I have is Enki, E-N-K-I, that's how I'm pronouncing it. He is the god of water and the river of Tigris. So you have the Tigris and the Tiberius rivers, and those were very important bodies of water to those villages and those countries because of the trade and their farming.
Geographically, because Mesopotamia doesn't really exist anymore, it would have been located in Southwest Asia, in an area between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. The others that we want to mention in Mesopotamia, Marduk. Marduk was a god associated with water in general, and Surtur, who was the god of mariners or seafarers, and it was important enough to them traveling on the water to have somebody that they worshipped to benefit and aid them.
Next up, we have, Lithuanian. So we're getting more into Europe. We're in the Europe continent now. So this is where they had a lot of these different things, and you can tell how people traveled and compared to the different cultures and the waterway travel. Like, especially, we're going to get into Viking, and this is where the raiding type of villages and peoples exchanged different things. Okay, so the first one we have is Bangapus, god of sea and storm. So that would be something, you would say, like, sailors would pray to, to have a good voyage, to have not as many storms. So, there's that one.
The next one is Lame. Lame was the goddess of wild spaces, including wild waters. People were often afraid of water that they weren't familiar with because you can't see underneath it, you don't know what's down there. So to reassure themselves, or even as cautionary tales for their children, they would attribute deities being underneath the water, and you just didn't want to do anything to risk making them angry.
Yes, don't make the water deities angry.
Then I'm next again. We're going to travel to the Slavic region. The one that I want to mention is Milkash, who is a goddess of moistness.
There's a trigger word right there.
Well, for some people. And a lady of waters. Yes.
That's what she is. And I know none of you are going to like the whole moist word. So the next one we have is Moriana. She is a giant female sea spirit. You'll hear about a lot of that with sailors and different adventures they go and praying to Moriana and whatnot. The next we are going into more Celtic, which we're a little bit more familiar with.
The Celts did a lot of traveling in the water. They did a lot of trading. They did a lot of raiding. It was safer for them traveling on the water. The first one that we're going to mention is Balasama, who is a goddess of lakes and rivers.
Yes. Okay, next one we have is Demona, water goddess associated with healing and rivers. So that was something, in my opinion, it's probably totally wrong, but something they would really pray for if someone were to be hurt on plundering and whatnot, to get them home safely and be safe and heal.
It's worth noting that for some cultures, their deities kind of reflected how comfortable they were with the water. If they were afraid of the water, or the water was usually dangerous and it was very risky to travel in the water, their water deities were a little bit more violent or a little bit more easily angered, and a little bit more scary in their physical description of them. The Celts tended to have somewhat more positive traits associated with their water deities.
Yes. So next we're going into English folklore. Everybody's heard of the River Thames. It's in England and it flows in southern England. While his ancient worship is obscure, he has become a popular symbol of the river in modern times. A lot of people will go there just to see the River Thames and tour that whole area. It being the subject of a song, Old Father Thames, and the model of several statues and reliefs scattered around London. So this is an image we were able to find of Father Thames. It's kind of creepy. I've seen different versions of it, but I kind of like this guy the best. So,
He sort of bears a resemblance to Santa Claus.
yes, very much so. So that one's not as prevalent, but with the River Thames,
it's a more modern.
So, next we are going to Ireland for our next god, our deity, Brigid, a goddess sometimes associated with water and where three streams join together, relating her to triple goddess. So, Brigid, yep. So we've got that. Oh, I got Brigid. Yes, I did. Woo. So this is Brigid. So this is where the three goddess and the rivers joining come in play with her visual.
And then I'm going to talk about Lear, who was the god of the sea. He was not a humanoid-looking deity. He was the personification of the seas. So he was often a changeable figure and form. The other one that I would mention is Laban, who was a water goddess who would appear as a seabird. She would act as a messenger or a mediator. She also, there's a story about her delivering what is essentially a message of a plague and wiping out the foes of the people that sent her. She also is sometimes referred to as the otherworldly woman, and sometimes would appear as like an ethereal female form.
So they're very varied, and this is where we are in going into now Norse Germanic, so our Viking fellows. They were very dependent on water raiding and very, very comfortable with the water and the sea with this culture. The first one we have is Nymphs, water spirits who are usually appear in human form. So they could change their form, and when they came out of the ocean or the water, they could change and morph into a human, which is very interesting.
I'm going to mention Nor, who was the god of the sea and seafaring. He is usually depicted as kind of an older, somber-looking man. He's notable, besides that, as being the father of Freyr and Freya, who were important Norse deities.
So next we are going to go into Greek and Hellenic, so Helena. So the first one we have is for Jennifer.
The first one is going to be Sito. Sito is the goddess of the dangers of the ocean and of sea monsters. The Greeks, as a culture, are one of those that they had both positive and negatives with their seafaring life. They did a lot of travel for trade, and they, of course, traveled and engaged in a lot of wars. But they also recognized a lot of dangers from the sea. And a lot of situations where the Mediterranean Sea, which was often calm, would suddenly be the opposite of calm. And she was the goddess of those things.
So the next we're going to go into is nymphs. There are 3 types, and like I said, every culture had something to do with a water goddess. These are the nymphs that they're most famous for in the Greek culture. They have Naiades, freshwater nymphs, Nereides, sea nymphs, and then they had Oceanides, nymphs of freshwater sources. So those are like when you watch, I'm going to dull this down a little bit of Hercules, and you see the nymphs playing in the water. Those are nymphs, water nymphs. So.
And then the next one is Oceanus. Oceanus was the Titan god of what was specifically the earth-circling river Oceanus, which is an older word for oceans. Interestingly, they referred to that river Oceanus that circled the earth as the source of all fresh water, and of course the ocean is salt water. But he was the Titan god of the source of fresh water.
And the Titans were like before the gods. They were like who the gods came from, when then they imprisoned them. The next one is Poseidon, and we'll touch more on him in our later videos and classes on this. Poseidon's kind of a big thing. He's the Olympian god of the sea and king of the sea gods, also the god of flood, drought, earthquakes, and horses. His Roman equivalent is Neptune, so he is a big player when it comes to the ocean and the water. They heavily, especially on the coastline, they heavily depended on praying to Poseidon and giving gifts so they could have good crops, because they were heavily dependent upon that for their families. So.
And then we're going to go into Roman culture, which she mentioned briefly, Neptune, but I'm going to mention Juturna,
That's how I would say it.
who is the goddess of fountains, wells, and springs. The Romans loved their fountains and got lots of fresh water through wells and groundwater that they got access to that way.
Yeah, that was a very advanced culture for waterways and everything else too. So they were very dependent on those things. The next one is Tiberius. Yeah, source. Yeah, the genius of the water Tiber. So the Tiber River. Okay, next we have, now it's kind of like expanding into greater European folklore a little bit.
I'm going to mention another one that's more modern, much like Father Thames was. Davey Jones. Davey Jones is kind of a deity that was mentioned and became popular by the pirates throughout the Atlantic and the Caribbean during the 18th century. It was a legend that spread among pirates. It's unknown if it's based on real people. But Davey Jones was considered the devil, the saint, or the god of the seas. And if pirates were successful, they thanked Davey Jones. If pirates were unsuccessful, then they might end up in Davey Jones' locker.
All right, so we are now getting into Asian. There is a broad spectrum for different areas of Asia. You go from India to China, Japan, all the Koreas, Vietnam, all of those. So we are going to start with
We're just barely going to touch on these because there are a lot of them, and they are specific to the territory and place that they came from. The first one that I'm going to mention is App, not to be mistaken with the modern technology. App is a group of water goddesses that are water elements. The elements were very important to Hindu religions, and as a general collective, they referred to App as all water elements that they attributed a female gender to.
All right, the next one we have, it's a long name, okay. Moriana, goddess of the rains, medicine, and disease. So you have to think in these villages, modern times right now, people are like crammed in together, and usually with those with Hindu families, there were a lot of people in one hut, one village, and that was something they really needed, was to pray away disease, pray for the medicines, and goddess of the rains for their crops, because a lot of these things, they started out as farming, and rain is very necessary for those kind of things. Okay, let's see here.
I believe we're going to China next.
Yes.
The Chinese folk religions had a number of water deities, but we're just going to talk about a couple of them, or I'm going to talk about a couple of them. Gong Gong, who was a red-haired dragon with the head of a man, was a water god. And then the other is Tam Kung, who is a sea deity of Hong Kong and Macau specifically. And besides being a deity of the sea, they also had the ability to forecast weather, which was very important to know what you were traveling out into.
I'm going to add one in so we can get Japan at least in one. Their folklore and deities are a little bit more complicated. They're very, very intertwined. This one could be this one could be that. Very intertwined. I'm going to talk about Ibisu, god of fortunes and fishery, often being referred to marine megafaunus such as whales and whale sharks, hence being also called Ibisu shark. So that was probably the easiest one I can explain, because they're very intertwined and very complicated. I don't have enough time for that. Okay?
All right. So next we're going to discuss one of the Korean deities, Emoji. Again, not to be mistaken for the modern technology. Emoji were sea serpents that were worshipped as deities that, as they became more powerful, would become true dragons in Korean lore.
Yeah. Okay, the next one we have is Yongwing, an undersea deity believed to determine the fortunes of fishermen and sailors. So these guys were really heavily preyed upon and worshipped, because Korea is a very big fish-faring country. So this is something that was really important to them. So now we're going into South Asia, which is more Hindu kind of things. We have Jennifer.
First up is Varuna. Varuna was the god of oceans and rain.
Yes. So the next one we have is Indra, king of the gods, god of weather, and bringer of rain, thunderstorms, and clouds. So there's a lot of Asian things, but we try to make it less complicated.
We'll just keep to the basics.
Basics, yes. So last but not,
Oh, no, we're not.
we have a little bit more of Asia.
I'm going to talk about a couple from the Filipino region of Southeast Asia. First up is Said, who is a god of the sea. And then also Maguayan, who is a goddess of the winds of the sea. So when you're traveling on the sea, especially early cultures, they relied on sails, and so they would pray not only to the sea, but also to weather-related deities, like we mentioned before, to have the winds that they needed to get them to where they wanted to go.
Yep. So next we are going all the way to Australia. They had some deities, but nothing too crazy for them. I'm just going to touch on one. Warnpa, creator of rain. Because as we know, Australia is very much a dry area unless you live on the coast, so it's very important for them to have their rains for their livelihoods.
And now we're going to travel to North America. To just a couple of the Native American tribes. First up is the Inuit. Worshipped a god of weather, water, tides, eclipses, and earthquakes called Alinak. They associated the tides and the weather along with eclipses, which is interesting because we know now how much effect the moon has on those things.
Okay, the next one we got is Tanajuk, the scorpion fish god and husband of the gods Nalajuk and Irisikoi.
He had 2 wives.
Yeah, multi-wives. So there is that. All right. Next up, we have. Where do we go?
We're going to Hawaii.
Hawaii.
And I'm going to talk about Kanaloa, or Tangaroa, who I believe are the same person, just went by different names. They took the form of a cephalopod, which if you aren't familiar with what that word means, a cephalopod is an octopus or a squid. They're the giant ones. He was the god of the ocean, magic, and the underworld, and they combined all of those in their worship of him.
Okay, next we go to the Maori culture, which is still part of Polynesia area. Ikatere, a fish god, the father of all the sea creatures, including mermaids, which is very popular in pirate folklore, even back to Christopher Columbus had mentioned he'd seen mermaids, which were actually manatees. Next, we are going into Mayan culture, so we're going a little bit more South America. Tayano is the culture. Atube is a goddess, mother goddess of fresh water and fertility, female counterpart of the god of Yakshu.
And the last one that we are going to talk about is from the Incan culture, Paracaka, who was the god of water and rainstorms.
So that is what we have for you today on different lore of the ocean. We'll touch base on a lot more in the next few weeks, so stay with us. Pardon our pronunciations of certain things. It should get easier. We've got kind of the hardest part out of our system, hopefully. Maybe?
No. But it's our first one for this season.
So
pardon the bugs.
Yes. We hope you enjoy. Tune in next week, and it'll be, what time are we putting these?
The videos are going to go up every Monday at noon. Next week's video will be about underwater cities and underwater civilizations, which is actually the one I'm looking forward to the most myself.
I'm excited for that one. So stay tuned with us, guys, and we hope you have a good day and happy reading.